But I think what's so important to me is like to learn from the mistake, not to now be shamed and punished and never given a second chance. Because I'm 21, I feel like I deserve a second chance to redeem myself.
Hey guys, welcome back to another Shared News from Home. We have to talk about Olivia Jade's Red Table Talk interview, but before we get into it, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. As always, I'm your host, Fiona Zaring, and today I am joined by the wonderful Avery Grooms, Gabby and Tyler Joseph Ellis. Hello, hello, you guys.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. So this was an insane interview, to say the least. But before I even want to get into what Olivia had to say and her portion, I want to talk about that part right at the very beginning with just the Red Table Talk ladies, because I think it was actually kind of one of the most powerful moments. In this little chat at the top, we learned that it was Olivia that reached out to them. They did not court her. They did not, bring her to Red Table Talk to tell her story. She actually sought them out, which I thought was very interesting. And they kind of hashed it out because Jada was all for it from the start, but Adrian could not have made it clearer that this was not something she was on board with. I want to get your opinions on, their conversation, sort of where.
Yeah, so Adrian basically said everything I was thinking at the beginning of the show. When I first saw that Olivia was going on the Red Table Talk, I kind of questioned it because, I understand that that's a place for people to go and clear the air, get everything out on the table and just discuss things in a conversational way. But at the same time, I was like, does she realize who the women are that she's having this conversation with? And the whole idea of what this scandal is about, which is privilege. And these women obviously come from different backgrounds, have different perspectives, totally different dynamics of their lives. So they're not going to let her sit there and play the victim, which I'm happy she didn't. But at the same time, they're going to tell it to her straight. And it's not going to be as comforting as I think she thought it would be. So it was just interesting to see her take this risk. I think if she was to play the victim, it would just make the situation worse. But the fact that she didn't play on that role so much, I think it almost helped her.
I agree. I think this was a great way to set up this episode and this interview because I think viewers going into it are either on one side or the other. They're for Olivia and they feel her pain, or they're like Jada was, or they're with Adrian where they're saying there's so many more issues going on right now. Like, I really don't want to hear this. Like, what you did was wrong. So I think it was good for them to set up the fact that, okay, we see both sides. We're going to hear this girl out for what she has to say, but it really doesn't excuse anything. So then viewers, when they're tuning into this interview, they don't think, oh, they're bringing Olivia Jade on because, they want to bring her back and give her this platform and just put her on a pedestal. I think they set the stage right from the beginning saying that this is a divided conversation, but we're going to have it anyway.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with both of you. I think most of, I went to USC, so I was very much, and I went during this scandal and during all of this happening. So as a USC student, all of us have a special amount of apprehension when it comes to hearing out Olivia, and Olivia Jade and the several people that were caught up in this college admissions scandal. So I logged on totally stone-faced, sort of similar to Adrian. I was, as someone who worked really hard to get into that school, I am sort of just and I was familiar with her previous videos about how she went into USC with a very specific type of college experience in mind, with partying and all of that, and that was not my experience at USC at all. So I had a special amount of sort of arm's length when it came to at all feeling bad, pitying, hearing a different side when it comes to this story. So I'm so glad they began this episode like this, because I thought they were going in being like, oh, and we're here to finally hear what she has to say. Like, thank God, like we've been waiting to finally clear her name, because I'm like, no, that's not what this is. So I'm so glad they immediately sort of extinguished that from the beginning. I thought it was very, very effective.
I couldn't agree more with all of you. Especially what you just said, Tyler. Like, I went into it watching with like okay, I'm obviously going to watch this because it's peak curiosity. Yeah. We've all been talking about this for months. Like, I'm going to hear this. But it made me so happy to feel like before she even said anything, the people she would be talking to, I can see Jada's perspective, you know, I can see the other perspectives. And as long as I know that they're with me on like a certain level of like, this is not just like an Olivia Jade puff piece. We have questions, we have comments, we have concerns. It made it feel just like, I don't know, the table was clean, you know, the slate was empty. There was no like, there was no agenda. But let's dive into what Olivia had to say, because of course she did have a lot to say. First of all, throughout the entire interview, she absolutely owns that the entire thing was a huge mistake, that she was, of course, sorry. And she really, really hammered that she recognized her need to educate herself on privilege. And we'll sort of dive into that more throughout this conversation. But I do think right at the top, that's something that I was impressed by and, you know, want to acknowledge. I think one of the major questions fans wanted answers to, including myself, was just how much she knew. You know, I wanted to know how much of this was like a dinner table conversation of like, okay, we're buying your way into USC, or was there a level of, you know, sort of protecting her from that from her parents? And she didn't give us like quote specifics of how it all exactly played out, the nitty-gritty conversations, but she did explain that she was not aware of everything going on. When the news broke, she was confused more than anything. She did share that she sort of just put her blind trust in this counselor her family had hired, because in her world, that was very, very normal. I thought this was something that was kind of eye-opening a little bit. At one point, she said, I know that it sounds so silly, but in the bubble that I grew up in, I didn't know so much outside of it. And a lot of kids in that bubble, their parents were donating to schools and doing stuff that advantaged them. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's what was happening. And I think it's really interesting. I, of course, was not in a bubble where every parent left and right was donating, you know, parking structures, libraries, you name it, to colleges so that we could get in. But I, of course, as someone who went through applying to college, am aware that that kind of goes on. So I'm just curious how her explanation sort of like sat with you guys. Did it make you kind of like think? Did it make you feel like, okay, I kind of see where she's going from this? It's hard to burst out of that bubble when you're in it. What were your initial reactions?
It was very interesting to hear that, because I didn't necessarily keep into consideration any perspective on her part. I definitely assumed it was more like, we're going to do this under the table, he, we're getting away with this, haha, and then it's sort of like, yay. But to hear that she, like all of us, was applying to school but her sort of college application process, that was one of the factors. It's like, and the monetary value, okay, great. How are we going to donate enough to the school to get in? Awesome. Like, that's part of the deal. And I didn't really think about that, like what, like a young mind, how without any sort of perspective, and if you're surrounded by people that are doing the exact same thing, how you have no remorse because you don't think it's wrong. And how she was a little bit in the dark, thought that a lot of people had college counselors that dealt with admissions like this. So it was an interesting perspective to hear. I didn't consider that. And I'm not saying, and she's the first to say in the interview, like, that's not an excuse at all. It was just a complete, almost astonishing lack of understanding of what privilege is, and how a bubble can be so cozy and so effective in keeping you completely away from other people's perspectives and worlds that they live in, that like when it pops, and when it did pop for her, how it was so interesting to hear that she didn't have anger first, because it wasn't like, crap, we were found out. It was more like amazement and confusion of how all of this happened, because it's like, wait, this is wrong, which I thought was bonkers, but fascinating. I don't know.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Tyler. I think it's tough when you hear Olivia coming at it with her perspective and she's just saying, you don't know what you don't know. And she had this white privilege blinders on her during this time. And she is pretty young, she's a couple years younger than all of us. And so I can totally see, this scenario unfolding where she just lives in this rich, neighborhood with friends and other family members and just people in her inner circle that are, just a part of this group that deals with things costing a lot or, not bribing, but just like you spend money here and there because this is what you want. And so and she also mentioned that her dad was the one that was mostly in charge of all of the college dealings for the two sisters. So I think it's fair that, he probably just came to her one day and says, oh, like, what school do you want to go to, sweetie? And then he's like, how about USC? Like, I heard it's great and you can stay close to home and, stay in the entertainment industry. And she's like, okay, sure, Dad, sounds great. And then he goes and does all of this stuff to try to get her in. And maybe she didn't make the grades. So that's when the money, became a part of it because that was a way that they could get her in there and the athletic stuff. So it's all just like this big, crazy situation where I can see that she didn't know all the details about, but was certainly just blinded by everything going on around her, to the fact that she didn't understand that what they did was wrong when it first came out. So that was definitely interesting. Glad that she shared that with us and a crazy perspective from her part.
Yeah, I mean, her explanation sat well with me in the sense that no one wanted her to come on and just apologize. Like, people want details and they want her to be aware of what's wrong in this situation. And that's what just stood out to me most is, like you said, Gabby, you don't know what you don't know. And that's the huge issue here. I blame her parents for not only doing this, but not educating her on the reality outside of this little bubble that she lives in. Like, she knew nothing about social inequalities. And it's like, you're a 20-year-old going to college and this came to a shock. It was shocking that this happened. Like, she wasn't angry at the beginning. So that was just like mind-boggling for me, because how do you wrap your head around that? Like, normally we're all sitting here like, obviously this is a huge scandal. That's so wrong. But just the fact that she couldn't see that because of this bubble, and it just all goes back to lack of education.
Totally. And like you guys all said, she was clearly very careful not to make excuses. If she ever said, like, it's something I didn't know, whether it was the following sentence or the one after that, she was very clear to be like, but that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make it okay. So whether it was, a team that sat down with her and prepped her, or, not that there would even be, I'm not saying that means she doesn't genuinely believe these things, but she knew the right tone, to strike, and what her goal, emotions were for this interview. And ultimately, I think she was very consistent throughout. And I think she probably at least helped a lot of people understand where her head was during this chapter, which I think is probably, at least in my opinion, the most interesting was, what did those conversations look like? Because if you've gone to college or considered going to college, those conversations at the dinner table with, if it's not your parents, somebody, this is typically a collaborative process. So anyways, very fascinating. She talked about her parents, of course, throughout all of this. And one of the things that kind of struck an interesting chord to me was she really made it clear that her parents were just trying to do the best they could for their kids. And while, of course, what they did was wrong, they weren't malicious in their intent. And I think that she was trying to sort of speak up for them in the way that she was able to explain for her own perspective. Like, listen, I was in an incredibly sheltered bubble. I'm not saying that's cool. I'm not saying it's not a huge embarrassment and that it's not okay, but this was our bubble. And while her youth, I think, makes it a little easier to forgive, I think she was sort of trying to convey that my parents existed in that same very ignorant bubble and just were doing what they thought was best. So I'm kind of curious on your take on, the family dynamic as all of this unfolded. She found out that her parents were in trouble and felt confused. What did her parents feel when they, kind of got caught for something? Did they feel confused too? I mean, how do you think it was like, sort of reacting to all of this unfolding so publicly, when there's clearly a learning curve attached to it that I don't think I paid attention to. I think I was like, well, you did something bad, you got caught, this is going to be super embarrassing and it sucks. The learning curve, I think, was sort of something I wasn't expecting. How did that strike you, Gabby?
I think so too. I wasn't expecting it. I think it comes down to the notion of just like pure selfishness a bit. I feel like all wealthy people have a little bit of that in them. You know, they have enough money to just sort of get what they want whenever they want it. And of course, these people are, you know, iconic actresses, and he owns his fashion brand. So clearly they've worked hard for their money, but still, like, when there's a situation that comes up where you want something and the only way to get it is like through being a really smart student or having good grades. And like, I think they even mentioned like college is not really supposed to be about race or about how wealthy you are. It's supposed to be about like the academics strictly. And so when, you know, you're in a situation where you can't get what you want, these people just naturally tend to throw money that way. So I think, like we've said, it just wasn't out of their comfort zone to try that. And, you know, it worked for a little while and then they ended up getting caught. And I'm sure they're really reaping the repercussions for that now and really understanding, which Olivia has said herself and her parents, that this was, you know, like you said, Tyler, the burst of that bubble or the slap in the face or the turning point where they can really realize, okay, like the way we live and the things we've done in this situation are not how it's supposed to be, and we're going to have to reevaluate everything.
Yes, Gabby, absolutely. I think that point of you throw money at everything if you have it, and then you'll get what you want. Like, that is a habitual recurring thing that's been happening in these people's lives ever since Olivia was born, but also far before that. I mean, if you look at, exactly what you said, being a famous actress, being the running a design company. I'm not saying that right, but you understand. It's like, it was bound to happen. Something like this was bound to happen. And you could be blinded by not only your privilege, but by your love for your children. And again, not an excuse, but if you want a bigger house, you pay enough money to get a bigger house. You want a boat, you pay enough money to get a killer boat. You want your kids to go to school. Of course, you're going to just do the thing that you always do, throw money at it, because ultimately you're not... you're blinded by two things: your love of your kids and just like your wealth and your privilege. So yeah, I think this was going to happen, whether it was a college admission scandal or something else. It was a lesson that needed to be learned that I think Olivia made very clear in the interview, being like, my parents are both of my parents are in prison right now, just for a little bit, but they're in prison. And that it gives them a good time to reflect on what you did and how you're going to move forward and learn from this. And I was like, yeah, because ultimately I wasn't thinking long-term. I was like, they're canceled in my brain. And I didn't really think about, she is younger than me. She has an entire life ahead of her. And then these parents, what happens when they get out of jail? And I think that's what Adrian was having a hard time with. It's like, you're going to be fine because you have the money to pay for you to be fine. And I was so sort of taken aback that Olivia is like, well, all I can do is put my time and energy as well as money into helping people, and like with education, like what she was talking about, which she made very clear that was just the beginning for her. And then I'm dying to know what the parents are going to do. How are they going to come back from this? Because they made a huge mistake. They know they made a huge mistake. Olivia claims they're good people. So I'm excited to see what's next. But yeah, this family dynamic is fascinating to me, and how it's still a family unit. They all love each other so much, willing to do whatever they can to help each other out, but with a complete lack of moral compass. And I'm glad that moral compass is being is being used now, and I'm thrilled to see what's going to happen with it.
Yeah, Tyler, you said it perfectly. I mean, when people have this much money, they're used to paying for anything and everything. So yeah. Okay, we'll pay for our daughter to get through college. It wasn't wrong necessarily in their heads. And I feel like when they got caught, they were just kind of confused, like how this could even happen, just because people have been getting away with this for so long, you know? But it's just interesting to see how everyone has to deal with the consequences differently. Of course, they're in jail, but Olivia's here living through it. And it takes a lot to come on and talk about this. it's a horrible situation. I think she held herself well talking about it, but I think the positive thing we can see from this is she's learning and growing, and hopefully her parents are also doing the same, because like I said, this is all surprising and confusing to them because they're not educated in certain categories where I think, you know, like we are, like normal people would think this is wrong, but they can't really wrap their heads around that because their circumstances are different. And it's just that bridge that gets in between that is what you have to get over that. You need to learn. And hopefully that's what they're doing with all this time.
Absolutely. And what's so interesting is I think, you know, 2020 has been such a unique year for so many reasons. And there have been so many positives of like, okay, like we're going to meet the moment. We're going to have 100 different types of conversations about things that need to change in this world. And I wasn't expecting watching this episode of Red Table Talk to feel like, okay, I'm continuing to sort of like examine things and try to look at things through a different lens. And like she literally said at some point in the episode, like, I am quite literally the poster child for white privilege. And I had no idea, like, this is so embarrassing. I think it ended up being much more of like a perhaps slap in the face that a lot of people out there watching, you know, could have hopefully learned something from this, which is, you know, at the end of the day, all we can really hope for. Olivia also talked about wanting a second chance, but not in oh, I am, you know, a victim. Everyone feels so sorry for me. I deserve forgiveness. It was a completely different tone. She talked about wanting to make it clear that she does know that this is wrong. She's working to move forward, you know, to be better moving forward. And she said, quote, "The picture that has been painted of me, I feel like that's not who I am. I'm not this bratty girl who doesn't want to change anything." She explained that it took reading about the backlash to understand why people were so angry over the scandal. And though it was, of course, you know, hurtful to read all of these comments and intense reactions about herself, her life, her family, she thinks it was important and that she learned from it, and, you know, better late than never. One of the things that she sort of talked about that kind of had that better late than never sentiment was watching some of her old YouTube videos and just absolutely cringing. I mean, they showed a clip of one and I cringed. I didn't say it. So, I mean, it was really, really tough, I think, to just like catch that reminder. She basically said in the clip, if you haven't watched the Table Talk, like,
but I do want the experience of like game days, partying. I don't really care about school, as you guys all know.
I don't know how much school I'll actually be able to go to. Like, I'm really interested in like the partying and the social element. And like, I don't know, I don't care about school. And like, oh my goodness, your parents are in jail. Like, what a miserable clip to have exist out there in the existence. Like, if only you had cared a little bit more. But I do think, you know, not to like get into the picking on her of it all, because it was a good example of how far along she had come. You know, what is like moments like that? What kind of emotion did that elicit from you, Avery, as you watched this?
So many emotions. I think Adrienne said it really well. Like, regardless if she was to come on this show or not, at the end of the day, she's going to be okay, and her parents are going to get out of jail and they're going to live their lives. Like other people, it wouldn't be the same outcome. So at the end of the day, everyone's going to be okay, even if she has the haters and all. But this was just the best thing she could do. The way she handled it, the way she explained herself, this was definitely a step in the right direction, just to show understanding and like show that she understands the depth of this topic and this situation, and talking about steps she wants to take to help other people and just grow more. I think that's like the best thing we can get from all this negativity. So that's great to see. But it's interesting to see like where her parents' heads will be at when they get out of there. So maybe they'll do a Red Table Talk. I don't know. That would be super interesting. But
family table talk.
Right? It's gonna be crazy.
I really like the example that she gave. You know, she said a few weeks back, she actually spent some time with some kids who were underprivileged and were just getting, I think it was an after school program, and she was volunteering there or doing something like that. And so I think that was a good example for her to give, to show that she is trying at this point, and that, you know, it's just the beginning of her giving not only her money, because as we've said, like these people are so good at just throwing money everywhere, but like she's actually giving her time and spending her time with different kinds of people than her, which is going to be so important for her learning and moving forward. But also it just like lets her be able to tangibly see like these kids are so grateful for this education and are just like so happy to be here. And she just realized in that moment that she didn't have that, you know, she didn't care. She was expecting it. She was privileged. She, you know, it wasn't exciting. They probably, you know, her parents probably came to her and said, oh, great, like you got into USC. And she's just like, okay, like that's what I wanted. And I got what I want again, you know? But in these kids' faces, she could actually see, you know, the difference between the two of them. So I think more moments like this is what's going to help her down the line.
Yes, absolutely. I think, yeah, I mean, Fiona, you mentioned that video and how it looks like a different young woman on the YouTube channel than it is like sitting at this table. I forgot, I mean, before we started filming, we're like, how long ago was this? Because it really doesn't feel like that long ago. But due to this year and due to just time melting as of late, it was like a year and a half ago. So over a year and a half ago. So I didn't really consider how much growth could happen in not only a year and a half, but a year and a half of a lot of time to reflect and a year and a half of hatred. I mean, the hatred pointed at you personally, at Olivia personally. And I don't know, I thought she came in as I expected, sort of tail between her legs. And it was uncomfortable. She was very nervous. And I think the hosts were very gracious with her, especially in the beginning. And just to see how she approached these questions so well, like what you were saying, Fiona, I'm sure there was a team, as there's a team with anyone when you're approaching some sort of scandal like this and speaking aloud for the first time. But she did everything. She didn't fall into any of the traps. When Willow asked her, what was the hardest part? She was like, the one of the first things she said, she's like, I don't want to play myself as a victim. Like, she didn't even go into, I was expecting her to be like, just like all my friends turning on me and that kind of thing. And because that's what I would expect. But to have that year and a half of perspective being like, it's going to serve not me, not anyone if I victimize myself. I don't know. I was shocked. Yet another shock of 2020 about how well she dealt with this personally.
Oh, I totally agree with you guys. And I think, you know, we've mentioned this throughout, but Adrienne was clearly her toughest critic at the table.
Yeah.
And there was a moment where she was asked point blank by Adrienne, like, what is your understanding of white privilege? And that to me is like, when you're talking about privilege sort of in the abstract the entire time, like no matter what you say, you're going to do your best to carry yourself. But when you've got a point blank, like this is a quiz, there's kind of feels like there's a right or wrong right now. You better say the right thing. She kept it simple and she said, I understand that just based off my skin color, I already had my foot in the door and I was already ahead of everybody. And I think that it was just sort of like that is a lesson of 2020 overall. That's been a learning curve for so many people. And she didn't miss a beat. She sort of just owned it, said it. She didn't like waver. And I felt that that was sort of like one of those moments where I think, Tyler, you mentioned this before we started filming, but like at the end of the day, Adrienne was asking her about her outfit. Like there was a pivot throughout the tone of this interview there. And that's not easy to do. I don't think any of us went into this watching it going like, I just can't wait to see how she does. And I walked away from it being like, okay, I feel like this girl has learned some stuff. So of course at the end, she's sort of, Gabby, you talked about this a little. She talked about starting her next chapter. She's like, I'm not going to pretend like I've, figured it all out and like I've done all of this work and that I, am sort of on the path already, but I am starting. I am going to start my next chapter. I want to put my money where my mouth is. I don't want to just write checks. I want to get involved and really make a difference. And I just kind of feel like I'm curious as we sort of start to share our final thoughts on all of this, like, what do you guys hope her next chapter is? Like, I, for one, feel like I was not expecting to be impressed with the way she delivered these sentiments and carried herself. And I think that a lot of people could stand to listen to her, like, waking up and learning all of this. And maybe it'll help other people, Gabby, where do you hope she takes this next step?
I hope after this interview and after we've sort of talked about everything again and the dust settles again, that she can just feel a little bit more free to have a voice, because she said, you know, for the past few months, like I haven't been able to say anything and I've really been hurting inside and just want to let people know that I'm sorry and all this went on and everything. So I really hope like for her and her family, they can just, like we've said, move on from this, because I'm certainly someone who believes in giving people second chances and just not holding a grudge or canceling people, you know, as bad of a thing as they did. But, you know, so hopefully she can just start brand new and just keep showing us new ways how she's trying to improve herself. And because she will be in the public eye forever, so the more that she can just come forward and, you know, not just recreate her lifestyle and beauty brand, but just like have a bigger voice with a bigger platform now that she can use that.
Gabby, absolutely. I think you mentioned the lifestyle and beauty part of it all, and I would love to see her maybe not do that, at least not in the near future. I would actually love to not hear much from Olivia. I would love for her to do a lot of work, not publicized, do it because it's coming from a place where she genuinely wants to help change the lives of people. And we get a follow-up red table a year or 2 years from now and being like, I'm running a nonprofit for a blah, blah, blah. Like, I want to be shocked again by her and by her willingness to do good in the wake of having your name completely tarnished. I think she seemed genuine to me. I'm usually pretty good at reading people. I mean, it seemed like she was really vulnerable at that table. I think those 3 women would not have let her get away unscathed. And it didn't feel like she got away unscathed. I think they could have drilled her a little bit more, but unfortunately the interview was not that long. So, but ultimately, it's so obvious that she's not proud of this. She's completely ashamed of herself. She didn't go back to school, which actually, as a USC student, I was like, did she go back to school after spring break? And she didn't. So I was like, oh, good to know. It's a detail I wasn't familiar with. But yeah, I just kind of don't want to hear from her. I think we've heard from this family so much. I hope after all of them come out of prison, we don't see them, hear from them, because they're working, because they're educating themselves, all of that, because I think that's the best case scenario for me. I don't want to see a article where it's like, look at Olivia Jade doing good, because that will completely destroy any sort of genuine like place for me personally. I don't know. Maybe that sounds a little harsh, but I don't know. I just don't want to hear from them. I'm kind of sick of it. How about you, Avery?
No, I totally agree with you, because I just think, well, first off, she just had this intense public interview about white privilege, her white privilege, with 3 Black women, and it didn't go horribly wrong. Like it went pretty well. So I think she should just leave it there, you know, like just that, let's end it on that note. Like you said, nothing else really needs to be said, but let's see moves being made in the right direction. You know, all this work she's saying she wants to do, like, let's see it. And if she does want to go back into YouTube, now having all this knowledge and experience, maybe she should use that platform and talk about things like this to maybe try to educate and discuss these topics with people who relate to her, and just that would just bring more light to this situation and also more understanding to her and compassion. Obviously, we know this whole situation's wrong, but at the end of the day, she wants to move on with her life. So as long as she's doing this like how she says she will, I think she'll be okay. Like you said, Tyler, we don't need the lifestyle, makeup, YouTube stuff right now. Let's see some change. So I'm here for that. So we'll have to see.
I totally agree with you guys. I think, you know what, it's going to be interesting no matter what. I think public interest is not going to die down in their family, but at the end of the day, like, it's really the work she does next. It's the way if she's going to keep her platform, it's the way she's going to use it. And I mean, my final question, I guess, I feel like we've kind of already made this clear, but to me, this interview was a success. Like, put simply, she could have gone in and she could have made me like her less, like her more. And I feel like she succeeded in what she had to do. Would you say you guys, you know, all sort of agree?
Yes. Yeah. This was a tough situation, and it didn't go wrong. She held herself well. She addressed everything, and she wasn't victimizing herself. So I think that's what was most important about it all.
I have only watched a few other Red Table Talk interviews, But I was just surprised again about how real the conversation was, you know, unlike many talk shows or things where it seems very scripted or, you know, there's just beats and moments and it's just supposed to be entertaining for the viewers. Like this was a real conversation. I feel like they were all just sitting in their living room and, you know, like we've said, not letting her get away with it, like really asking her some tough questions. I would have personally even loved to hear from Willow more because they're more around the same age. And so she could probably relate to her a little bit more. She was kind of quiet during this interview. But overall, yeah, it was just really raw. And we got to learn a little bit more about her perspective.
I think, absolutely. I think it was a huge success. I think a lot of people may never forgive her. But the awesome thing is, it was very clear to me that Olivia wasn't asking for forgiveness, which made the interview so much more palatable for someone, for just like anyone that has a preconceived notion about her. It was like, I assumed her doing a talk show was like, hey world, I'm so sorry. Can you please forgive me? Because I want to continue doing my makeup stuff. It was so much like, can't expect any of you, including these three women, to forgive me. All I need is to say publicly, I'm sorry, because I haven't been able to say anything publicly. And ultimately, it humanized her. And I feel like she needed humanization more than she needed forgiveness from the world. And I think that was a home run. Personally, I think the fact that I was watching her so nervous and feeling empathy and compassion for her and really feeling that there was remorse and knowledge and growth and a lot of growth left to do, but growth from her. It was like, yeah, all you other people that are in her circles, because apparently her circles, they're all doing the same thing, take notes. Because you have someone that went through the ringer when all of you guys got pretty unscathed when you are doing the same thing. But look at the growth that happens from it. I don't know. So clearly huge success on my end.
No, I think these are all such good points. And you know what? Anyone out there who got into college in this way, you know, but maybe quietly has never felt any of these repercussions, I hope they were listening too. So you guys, this has been quite the conversation. I know this Red Table Talk episode was so highly anticipated. And I just want to know, all of you guys watching, what are your thoughts? You know, do you feel the same way we do? Did it not hit the right tone for you? Do you still have questions? Let us know all of your thoughts down in the comments. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. As always, I'm your host, Fiona Zaring, and I was joined by the whole team today, Miss Avery Grooms, Gabby Ganta, and Tyler Joseph Ellis. If you guys want to keep up with us on social media, our handles are on the screen right now. Come say hi. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.